Number 308 of East Central's favorite podcast. I'm Jeremiah Morrill, joined by executive video producer, audio engineer Zach Burcham, and my forever co-host, Mr. Dakota Davis. Dakota, what do we have in store today?
Today's episode is a Boss Hog of Liberty first, actually. We have a candidate a candidate seeking the nomination to run as President of the United States under the Libertarian Party ballot. We have Mike Termat. Is that how you say it? Did I say it right?
Exactly. If you get the Mike part right,
hey,
that's all that
really
matters.
All right, I will be calling you Mike for the rest of the episode, but we're going to be talking to Mike about his background, some things about himself, everything that you guys need to know. We're also going to be talking about his primary platform positions, what separates him from the rest of the pack that is seeking the nomination as well. He also spent quite a bit of time as a police officer, and we'll be delving into his service as a law enforcement officer. And he was also a White House economist. We're going to be talking about the duties. Yeah, it's going to be a good show.
It's going back some time.
And at the very end, we're going to be asking Mike what previous Libertarian POTUS candidate he was most like. So if you want that answer, make sure you stick around until the very end of the show.
You're going to try to...
I'm not going to give you an answer you're going to like.
Yeah.
Are you going to pretend to stroke out on...
No, I will not stroke out. You want to stick around because of all the things I'm going to say that's going to piss off your audience. I promise that one will piss them off the most.
That'll be the one.
Okay.
This show is about our lives in rural Indiana. We're here to push your boundaries and make you think as individuals. Sometimes we'll provoke you, other times we'll make you laugh, but hopefully you'll always learn something new. We just did ourselves a nice, fun Patreon. Dakota, what did we learn?
Well, we did about 15 minutes as the actual episode, but if you are on the Patreon secret Facebook group, then you got like 50 minutes of live stream of us messing with the audio equipment and resetting some things, making it sound good. And so patreon.com/BossHogOfLiberty, that is where you go to support the show on a monetary level every month. That's how we pay the bills for the entire studio. That pays for everything around here. And it starts at $5 a month. It goes all the way up to $50 a month. We give you access to show notes before the show starts. We give you access to the Facebook group. You get a bonus episode every single week, and you also get sometimes people who listen make memes of the show. You guys are the first ones that get those if they get sent to us. And we've also sent out T-shirts now, postcards, stickers, a bunch of stickers. You just get goodies. There's been some other things that we've seen you guys books. I think we've had drawings for books.
We've had
for
book lotteries. Absolutely. There's no such thing as a free lunch. That's the old Tanstafall Libertarian line from 20, 30 years ago.
All the more reason why your audience should be chipping in.
That's right.
Abilities to invest in the program here.
That's right.
And I wanted to add, because I'm privileged today to see the inside of your studio in a way that those of us who have been watching from the outside haven't been able to experience firsthand, right? So I can tell all of your viewers out there, this is a good-looking studio, but let me choose my words carefully. You're obviously not wasting anyone's money here.
No.
Okay? Yeah. That's pretty obvious. Anyone who makes an investment in your program,
That's
the money
true.
is obviously being used carefully.
Yeah.
Because you've got nice equipment, but you haven't splurged on merely cosmetic things.
Everybody thinks that what's behind us is a green screen. There's an actual...
No, it's real.
It's a barn door behind us.
Yeah, that's an actual barn door.
This is an old township trustee's office that was a tattoo parlor, that was an ice cream shop in the 50s, and before that it was probably a cobbler's. But this is where they parked horses.
Before that, I think our landlords...
Back in the day.
I think our landlords, Scott Frost, that you needed to take it to the shop.
Wheels. I understand the wheels and the axles were
Jeremiah's going through all of it with the camper.
I would imagine they probably had some berry picking. What's the most manly thing you could do, Dakota, to call back to our Patreon this week?
Yep. On the Patreon episode, Jeremiah asked me if I wanted to do some bearing packing. It's a very manly activity. We could drink some beers. And I thought he said do you want to come and do some berry picking
with Zach and I on
it
Sunday
was a very
morning.
manly activity. I was like, what?
All right. Say thank you so much to the folks that make this show happen each and every month. If they donate $50 or more, they get a shout out at the beginning of every episode. Dakota, what is the narrative on the people that help us out?
Mr. Jonathan Phillips, our favorite car dealer in the continental United States. He's also running for City Council Ward number 2. I'm sure he would be very appreciative of some help. And we also have Mr. Anthony Meyer, who is delivering your goods and packages all across the United States. He's a long-haul trucker. And then Miss Christy Avery from all the way in Fort Wayne, Indiana, our favorite Norwex dealer as well.
That's right. I do know John has a golf tournament that he's signing up people for right now that happens the same weekend as your big mini marathon.
Oh.
I think it's September 18th, 19th, somewhere in there. So folks want to play.
Definitely not be playing golf that
You're
weekend.
not gonna play
John,
golf the next day.
Yeah, I can guarantee you.
Zach would do it.
I don't know. Maybe. Do you think I'll be able to,
drive
Zach?
yeah, you should be able to.
I have some thoughts on that, but I'm going to save it for the final
Well, you may
thoughts
be
portion.
able to, but that doesn't make it a good idea.
Monday, Tuesday.
Yes.
Monday, Tuesday. That's when it'll hit.
Yeah,
That's when the
DOMS,
pain
delayed
Day
onset
after the
muscle
day
soreness.
after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also have some merchandise. You can just send us an email. We've given up on doing any kind of a storefront because they take too much of our money, so we do it directly now, and my wife makes the T-shirts. So send us an email.
It's Dakota's little embezzling scandal.
Dakota@bosshogof.liberty.com, or you can just send us a voicemail on bosshogof.liberty.com, and we will get you squared away and taken care of. We have many different T-shirts, long sleeve T-shirts. There's different designs. There's hoodies, everything that you could ever want. We've sent them out to our Patreon members before, and I haven't heard a single complaint. So,
While you're plugging your wife doing the merchandise, does she have anything coming up, Dakota?
the Newcastle Farmers Market.
Is she doing a drop?
Big cup drop, right?
She did a drop
Did
yesterday.
they sell out already?
It was yesterday at 3 p.m. No, she's got... The drops have been weird. So she's like... There's definitely more people that are waiting to go to in-person events this year. So
They want to see them, and touch them, and
like
feel
to
them.
pick up the merchandise before they buy it.
All right, very good. Let's get to our guest.
Okay, all right, yeah. I thought that you were going to continue on.
No, you're doing a great job.
I wasn't paying attention.
I'm enjoying you.
I'm sorry, Mike. This has already been a train wreck. So you are currently seeking the nomination to run for president in the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party, for listeners who don't know, the nominations are conducted a little bit differently. So instead of the Republicans and Democrats here in Indiana, where you go to the poll and you say, I'm a Republican, I want a Republican ballot, and you pick which Republican you want to be on your ballot in November, if you tell them you're a Libertarian, they will give you an independent ballot here.
That's right.
So it's very different. It's different all across the United States based on what kind of primary system you have. But kind of walk our listeners through
Sure.
the process
In
that you're
the
facing.
Libertarian Party, we do have a convention, just like the Republicans and the Democrats do. But our convention is completely open. The delegates that go to the convention are not in advance wed to, they're not obligated to.
Their states send people and say, go do what you're going to do. They're not pledged
do
to
what
any
you're
candidate.
Gonna do. They're not pledged, obligated, or wed to any of the candidates. In the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, you have the primary votes at a retail level months in advance to select the delegates who are legally obligated to vote for that particular candidate, that particular individual.
Right.
Ours is a complete open convention. It's a food fight. It's a bit of a mess. We will go through a series of votes until, dropping out the lowest vote getters out the bottom. We will go through a series of votes until we have one candidate who gets 50% or more.
So that's the process side.
That's
it'll
the
be
process side.
decided. So between now and essentially Labor Day weekend of next year, you're going to be barnstorming the country, making appearances,
Our
seeing
convention
people.
will be in May.
Memorial Day weekend of
Memorial Day.
2024.
So
in
after
DC.
that, assuming I win the nomination, which I cannot assume yet, there's a tremendous amount of hard work between now and May. But the general election process will really begin after that nomination. And at that point, it'll be narrowed down to one Republican, one Democrat, and either me or another representative of the Libertarian Party. And at that point, I think it'll be a lot of fun.
All right. So let's get to know you a little bit, Mike. You live in Virginia now.
Live in Virginia for 20 years in Florida.
You ran for Congress recently in South I guess it'd be South Florida or Southeast Florida.
That's right.
Nobody lives in Southwest Florida. That's all swamp and alligators. So it has to be Southeast Florida, right?
Well, don't tell Naples that. But yeah, in Southeast, District 20, Broward County and Palm Beach County. I ran for Congress a couple of years ago.
Would you have been President Trump's congressman if you had won?
If I had
If
won,
you had won, would you be his congressman right now? Is he? Were you on his
let
ballot?
me think about that.
Is Mar-a-Lago in Broward in your?
The line is really close. The District 20 line goes through Palm Beach, right near his property. I believe he would just be on the other side.
Oh, just missed out on the chance to vote for Mike.
That's a really interesting question. Of course, I'm not a Trump guy in general, right? So he would not be happy if I were representing him.
You might get the chance to meet him.
Might get a chance to meet him. I was in New York in the 80s when he was there in the 80s, and so I have a long history of being aware of the Donald, as we used to call him.
Yeah, I've been aware of him since I watched.
Well, there's a couple different things. About me personally and my background, I was an economist for a couple of decades. I was in the banking industry for a while. I did, as you had mentioned earlier, I earned a PhD and a master's degree in economics, went to business school as well, have an MBA, worked for banks for a while. I worked for the White House as an economist for a couple of years. I worked for a couple of other agencies.
Which president?
George Herbert Walker Bush, going way back.
1.0.
1.0. We're talking 90, 91, 92. The president who said, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And then, of course, did agree to new taxes, which...
Was that one of your policy points? You said, hey, let's raise taxes.
Appointment. When you really think that your boss's 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 boss is as fiscally conservative and committed to being so as you are, and then you find out it's all politics.
So that's the moment you become jaded with politics.
I would say that was a big contributing factor. Yeah, it's hard to single out just one moment because there's so much that happens in Washington that will let you down, that will break your heart. And I was there for a long time. I was there for like 15 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was at the George Washington University. I had my own business with a partner of mine, educating financial services professionals and providing strategic consulting services. I was an advocate for free markets and more competitive markets in the financial services industry for a decade. So was really around the block in terms of public policy, in terms of financial policy and economics. I taught at 3 different universities. So I have a lot of experience in how the government works, how our financial markets work, and how financial institutions work. So there's a lot that I believe that needs fundamental reform in that sense.
Where'd you earn your master's and PhD from?
The George Washington University. When I moved to Washington to go to school, and then just stayed to be involved in the government. Like a lot of youngsters, I thought I was going to go to Washington and make the world a better place, because that's how it works, right? You go to the seat of all power. You teach everyone good, free market, pro-market principles, and then the world is going to work better because the federal government of the United States is going to get smaller in scale and scope, and food's going to taste better, and beer is going to be colder, and it's just going to be a happy world. And you do get jaded fairly.
Burns hard, and then you kind of 2 or 3, 4 lost elections along the way, and you go into the wilderness and reset a little bit. So you spent some time in Washington,
Yep.
in the 90s,
Yep.
and then you went and you started the next career, which was public service and law enforcement in Florida.
Yeah, I had always wanted to be a cop, and put it off. In fact, I can date back to the first time I took an entrance exam was for the Washington, D.C., the Metropolitan Police Department, which was in approximately, I want to say 1990, 89, 90, something like that. And just decided it wasn't a good idea. I just didn't feel like I could afford it. You know, I wanted to raise a family. And I don't know that I should be
Going from an MBA to being a civil servant, there's a difference in the pay scale.
There happens to be a difference. There happens to be a difference. And I'm not sure I should be proud of the fact that I had to make that decision, at least in part, based on money. But practicality being what it is, I did put it off. And by the time I turned 49 in the police academy. By the time you're 49, you've put it off long enough. If you put it off any further, you're running the risk of, you reach a point of no return. So I figured that was my last best opportunity and went into the academy about a dozen years ago. I was on the road for 11 and a half years as a road patrol officer in Broward County.
All right. And then you say, okay, being a policeman's cool, but being a congressman, that's the job I want. What makes you say, okay, now I'm going to get back into politics? I'm trying to understand the timeline here and the psyche of...
I was a registered Libertarian for substantially the entire time that I was a police officer. I registered as a Libertarian around that same time. Like a lot of other people, I was a Libertarian at heart before I became registered as a member of the Libertarian Party, of course. Which is a long-winded way of saying, as a police officer, you see the world for what it is in terms of public policy. I used to say that...
You're where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, it's where the rubber meets the road. That is well put. I used to say that if you were not an economist before becoming a police officer will turn you into an economist because you see the effects of really bad public policy up close and personal, the way that it affects people that you grow to care about.
Yep.
One of the weird things about being a cop is that you do sort of fall in love with your community. It's a love-hate relationship. You can be frustrated with your community, right?
Governor in 2016 and his other campaigns before, it was always the initiation of force, right? Government is force. And as a law enforcement officer, you're the force.
Yeah.
So if you are passing a federal law, if you have a local county ordinance, a law is going to be enforced by violence. I'm going to create violence. I'm going to make a guy like Mike is going to have to show up, and ultimately that's what the conflict is.
It's at
that's
the very least the threat of force, right?
But that's what any law leads to. So then it's the decision, okay, of how big do I want government to be and what it does. So I think as a law enforcement officer, you've had 12 years to see this and to actually understand the consequences of government's law-making decisions.
Yeah, one of the things that I had not appreciated until becoming a cop, among several things, but one of them is the extent to which so many police officers have a libertarian streak. I don't think they would characterize it as such. Most of the cops that I worked with were registered Republicans. But I did find that old-fashioned feeling of being frustrated with your boss, right? We all love to hate our boss. I'm sure none of you here just have a problem with your bosses.
Zach works for the government, so he's totally happy.
He loves his boss, probably.
He's our token Democrat.
But normal people sometimes get frustrated with their bosses, right? And the way that plays out if you're a cop is, what's the most recent stupid thing that the legislature did, right, in Tallahassee in our case? Or what's the most recent silly thing that the mayor wants us to do? Or what the commission said recently? And so you naturally start to merge your frustration with the government with the frustration of, your job, because you're being asked to enforce things that increasingly you're able to recognize are probably not a good idea. The biggest, most obvious example is the war on drugs. You see that just, however you may feel ethically, as libertarians, we feel pretty strongly that the government doesn't have the moral authority to tell you what you can or cannot do with your body. But just objectively speaking, we're not doing a very good job of keeping people away from drugs, of helping people who are addicted, of keeping young people away from something that is extremely dangerous to them. And so you become frustrated both on an ethical level and an objective level in terms of what's good for society, but you also get frustrated by your own inability to make the kind of differences that you want to make, because you see that what's really affecting your community are bad public policies, whether that's the war on drugs or bad public schools, right? The black markets that the war on drugs creates, and then you have youngsters going from crappy schools into peddling drugs because they think that's a good opportunity. You see crime concentrated in areas because of bad housing policy, bad zoning, and you see these things play out, and it's frustrating. Not just because you're a cop, because you're anybody who cares about a community.
I heard this story from I think it might have been on a TV show or something, but it was a Baltimore police officer, and he was looking through old records from like the 60s and 70s and seeing basically the bad parts of town that the officers were responding to then, and him having the realization of, oh my God, it's the same places.
Yeah.
Like how is it still that bad?
We have persistent intergenerational poverty, both in terms of human lineage as well as geographic areas, right?
Right, yeah.
We've just got places where people live where poverty is concentrated, where crime is concentrated. And so much of that is the result of bad public policy. So much of that is not predicted by completely free markets. You would not just naturally expect that to crop up from an environment in which nothing but markets decided how things work. So in that sense, as an economist, it's particularly frustrating.
It is interesting your background in Washington and as an economist, and then also going into law enforcement, because I'm sure that brought you a different perspective to your economics education, and then also helped with your perspective as an officer, right?
Sure.
So I'm sure that they both kind of weaved in and out of each other.
Agreed, 100%. The other thing that law enforcement, and by the way, in public schools as well, is the result of not having market forces driving how people behave. We don't have much competition for the best officers, for example. It's difficult for officers to change from one agency to another because of seniority rules and how unions control those labor markets so often. And, of course, unions preclude, in many cases, the evaluation of officers based on performance. So much is tied to your longevity, how many years of service you have, and things like that, so that people are largely paid the same whether they perform well or not. You also don't have a lot of competition among the agencies themselves. In other words, in the city where I worked, the city basically only had two choices. One was our police department, or, as they reminded us from time to time, they could dump the agency, fire all of us, and hire the sheriff's office to police the But there wasn't a lot of competition, and part of the reason for that is not just cultural, but we have state law in almost every state, I believe, although I haven't conducted research into this specifically. But I believe that the vast majority of states in the United States have standing law that makes it very difficult for, say, a private sector organization to bid on a contractual basis to provide policing service to a community. And so you don't see very much competition. There's a lot of political capture that goes on because of that. In the town where I worked, the police department was really the only organized political force. And so I think that made it particularly difficult for the strength of the union to be overcome by a strong mayor.
It's
or
definitely
commission.
interesting that you bring that up, considering the conversation that we had literally just the last
Yeah.
episode.
So last week in Indiana, we have we have an opportunity where some towns have been creating their own police departments.
Yeah.
And they will hire individual folks, but they will get all of the force of law and badges, and they'll
Right.
go out and they can do their own policing.
And they're public sector employees.
and they're
the
they're-
towns hire them directly.
The towns hire a town police chief, and then they will have it's a marshal service is what it is.
Yep.
And they're privately they're really not serving the town at all. They're using the town's badge, and then they get police powers anywhere in the state, and they'll go work a private security job. And it's created some controls issues, you would say, in
Yeah,
communities
yeah.
where you've got a town of, last week it was a town of 120 people here has 23 police officers. That
23 police officers for
in
a town of 120 people.
Yes.
Yeah.
It sounds
Yes.
expensive. Sounds like an expensive option.
Yeah,
Well, they don't pay them. The town gets
Oh.
the town doesn't pay them at all.
Oh.
They furnish their own car, and yeah, they may do an hour or two of work in the town, but they may live 50, 60, 70 miles away, and they're off doing private security work on their own.
Oh.
So they
with the town's badge.
with the town's badge.
Oh.
Without
I can
necessarily
see
having
where
held
this
a lot
is
of
going.
training.
Yeah. Good luck.
So
Yeah.
with the sheriff that was on with us last week, he's like, hey, just picture that today you're sitting here, Dakota, but in 2 weeks you could have a badge, a gun, and a police car, and you're a cop now.
Yeah, that's a scary proposition.
Yeah.
Working in downtown Indianapolis for a restaurant that wants a police officer as security.
Yeah. Now you're an armed cop standing
get it.
outside of a
Yeah.
nightclub.
I get it.
Uh,
You need a
So
little bit
it's-
more control than that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's,
However you enforce that, whether that's the state enforcing it
but
or
it's
the
definitely.
town.
I mean, you're running for president, but it's
Local
definitely a hyper local issue.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've wondered.
It's an
so-
alarming one we discovered in the last month.
Yeah. So I've kind of wondered the same thing of like how you might be able to drive some kind of, as you put it, competition amongst police forces of how can we compete to be better cops for the community. And like you said, I support unions. I'm a union member myself.
Sure.
And it's like I understand, equal pay amongst the workers, but there can be some type of incentive, bonus, monetary system where a department is like, listen, you could potentially all walk away with this much money on a paycheck, and we're going to be polling our community. How do you view the Newcastle Municipal Police Department, and
Sure.
or based on responsiveness? How are we responding to calls? What are we doing things? And it's
And you would hope there'd be that kind of feedback.
right. And then you go, this bonus that you're going to get is directly tied to how.
To your satisfaction score.
Sure.
of
To
the
how
locals,
you-
Or
right?
how the community,
Yeah.
however
Well, that
you
I'm
evaluate
thinking
it.
like that might be a part of it, but then other parts are like, how long did it take you to respond to this call? And things, stuff that's not based on like, because as we're getting ready to talk about, like, the defund the police movement was super high. People were very upset. Input than the things that they saw on social media from halfway across the country that wasn't reflective of your work might negatively impact you, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, it.
Situation where we're as easy as saying, well, the mayor needs to do a stronger job of holding the agency accountable, and the commission needs to do a better job. But as a practical matter, we don't typically see that, either because of unfamiliarity, outright incompetence, sometimes even corruption, frequently political capture. But for whatever combination of reasons, and politics, overlay the whole thing, we just don't see local politicians taking the bull by the horns. one of the things that we can do is replace the federal doctrine of qualified immunity with a requirement that police officers carry their own personal liability insurance. And the reason I'm a proponent of the idea is twofold. Number one, we want a way for police officers to be held accountable by a market system, so that if you screw up at your job, if this is just a habit of yours to screw up at work, you're going to get priced out of the market in terms of your premium rates, which of course is how you would want it to work. It's how you would want it to work for surgeons, for example.
So essentially what you're proposing is, hey, okay, a good officer, it might cost them $15 a month for them to have insurance against something that may happen.
Right.
But if somebody has 3, 4, 5 different incidents and it's going to cost them $800 a month to carry that insurance,
for another job.
Then it's no longer going to be able to support them with
That's
that, and they
exactly
need to move
right.
on.
And of course, the incentive would be to, in addition to all the other reasons to be careful, it would create an extra incentive to be more careful if it's going to hurt you in the pocketbook. The other thing about it that I think is real important is that it would introduce the third-party check on the system, because an insurance company is not going to put up with a union saying, well, you can't have that information, right? An insurance provider is going to require everything from training records to performance evaluations to specific cases, to hiring information and promotions type of information. Everything that you might even be able to conceive of, an insurance company is potentially going to require. And no amount of stonewalling by a union is going to change the fact that if you want insurance, you're going to have to provide the information. So I think that that's very important. The other thing that I think is important about it is that although qualified immunity doesn't actually affect that many cases, police officers view it as important. They believe that it plays an outsized role in driving police culture. So to the extent to which we could get rid of it, I think that we would move police culture more in the direction we want it to go, which is to say better aligned with the underlying values of the community. And of course, you know, the doctrine of qualified immunity basically means it's very difficult in many cases for citizens to seek redress in court, which is, of course, un-American. That's not what we want. You know, we don't tell people that have been wronged or who believe that they've been wronged by a doctor, well, you know, the doctor didn't mean it, so suck it up, buttercup. You know, that's not how this works, right? You have an opportunity to seek redress in court, and if you're wrong, then you're not going to, you know, win your case. But I don't think it's a good idea for us to be in the business of telling people they can't sue.
So you have a website, thegoldnewdeal.org.
Yes.
And this is reforming police accountability is one of your 10 tenets on the website.
An important one. That's right. Our platform we call the Gold New Deal, and that's because we're obviously making fun a little bit of the original New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt. We're obviously also making fun of the Green New Deal of AOC. I know you guys are big fans, so I apologize.
Watch it, Bucko.
There is a picture of me visiting Washington, D.C. when I was doing some lobbying with Purdue University, and her office was right across the hall from our congressman's office. So
is that right?
Congressman,
did you bring the cameras in there?
Oh, I was right there. I stood outside and got the picture with the gold plaque in the Rayburn building or whatever it was. But yeah, Congressman Messer's office was on one side, and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez was across the hall. So yeah,
good for you. That's funny.
Oh yeah.
So
I did the whole photo op.
That is awesome. So the Gold New Deal, the idea is gold is the color of the Libertarian Party. The idea is that we need a new relationship between us and our government. A new relationship between us.
Maybe a new relationship with gold, right?
Not necessarily with gold, but certainly the gold color of the Libertarian Party. Which is to
so this
say,
has nothing to do with the gold standard. That's not what we're not. This is a monetary policy thing.
That's not exactly, but it is a part of our platform that we need to replace the Federal Reserve System's discretionary policy with a rules-based system. We believe we need to get rid of the Fed completely. So that is an important piece of it. We want to end the Fed and replace it with a rules-based system for how monetary policy is driven. We believe that the Fed is, best efforts notwithstanding, it is proven that it is utterly incapable of living up to the mandate that we have given the Fed, and so it's time for us to thank them for their service
And move on.
and move on.
Very fair. So tell us about some other major tenets of your platform. You also are stating. I had it here, and then I started jumping out on AOC. So you indicated that you want to federally phase out public education. I will tell you that public education is in the Indiana Constitution, so I don't know how we can get out of it here. We have to maintain or provide common schools here constitutionally.
I understand.
So what does that
And
look
you're
like
right.
to you?
The last vestige of public education will be difficult to sunset, but it starts with a school choice program. And I believe that over time, people will see that in the vast majority of cases, public schools do not stand up well to an equally funded private school. The reason that public schools can compete today is because, of course, they are the ones that are given the money. And the private schools find it very difficult to compete with public schools because they don't get access to the funds.
What would a school choice system look like at a national level?
I don't think we want one at a national level. I
Okay.
think we want a national conversation that says, if you are monopolizing your local primary and secondary education on behalf of the public school system, you're doing something that's silly, that runs against all economic theory, that runs against all economic experience. We know that it doesn't work. We know that education is just like a lot of other services where competition matters. It is not a coincidence that the American public is frustrated with the performance of our public school systems.
Homeschooling has skyrocketed.
Homeschooling has skyrocketed, and it is no coincidence that we are at the same time frustrated with the performance of public schools, and we have a system that's completely monopolized, and monopolized in the public sector in the sense that most public school systems do not make those public funds available for competitors. They just railroad all of that money into the public school system. So I believe that once the American public understands how well competition drives success, they will be increasingly open to it, including, by the way, homeschooling. There is no economic reason, there is no objective reason why you would exclude homeschooling from participating in the public funds that are raised for the purposes of education.
So with that, would it be phasing out public education on the national level? Are you talking just
We would allow
immediately getting rid of
No.
the Department of Education?
Well,
at
yes,
the
the
federal
Department
level?
of Education's got to go. It plays no important, useful, or even positive role.
Well, they
Okay.
administrate a hell of a lot of student loans. They're a bank.
They are a
They're
bank.
They're a finance department.
Let's not even go down the student loan forgiveness path. If anyone can hear us out there and has student loans, I'm sorry about that. I hope that it's a matter of ethics.
Yes, but they're not bankruptable. Every other debt is bankruptable. You die with your student loan. If you don't pay it, it's
is
there
a
forever.
That's true.
The-
That
you
is
know,
a
the
problem.
federal government did stick you with something that you can no longer bankrupt.
Yeah, it should be bankruptable just like any other asset. It should be. There's no reason why it should be treated any.
Hear us talking about competition within education and go, oh, he's going to, if he became president, then the Libertarians would take all the money from the Department of Education and divide it amongst all the private schools and public schools in the United States.
No,
and
we
you're
would-
saying, no, it's going to be left up to the states
It
to
would
decide.
be absolutely left up to the states. Indeed, it should be left up to local school boards. In my view, in the vast majority of cases, it would require state legislation to enable the school boards to share that financing with private sector schools. But that is the way to create competition. And I believe that over time, public schools will go out of business because of competition, but we wouldn't order them out of business.
What's foreign policy look like in the term Maat administration? Are we a non-interventionist type? I assume we're not totally concerned about China, Russia, and the Ukraine right now.
That's exactly right. We're much more engaged commercially with the world, a much more pro-free trade, pro-growth, pro-income, pro-wealth economic policy toward the rest of the world. But we would not be blowing so much money on the Defense Department, number one. Number two, we would be perfectly clear about what is and what is not in America's interests. It is not in our interest, for example, to make promises regarding Taiwan that we're going to be there to back up Taiwan come hell or high water. We have accidentally sent the signal, what we have called for decades now strategic ambiguity. We have accidentally sent the signal that if you invest in factories in Taiwan, you can rest assured that the United States Navy is going to back you up. And that's the wrong signal to send, of course, because now we find us in this very weird situation where we believe that the investments that have been made in Taiwan, we can't live without, right? Specifically technology, specifically chips, more specifically high-end chips that we rely on for artificial intelligence, disproportionately have been developed in Taiwan, and so now we feel, in many cases, Washington policymakers feel like we're stuck in this self-fulfilling prophecy where we have indicated to investors Taiwan is safe, which was never a good policy to pursue. Now we rely on the supply chain coming from Taiwan.
So if that's the case, should the United States has indicated, hey, we're going to support Taiwan and the technology that's there, should the United States all over the place on the chip market in the United States as well?
We should not be interfering in those markets. We should be unwinding the promises that we have implicitly made to investors in Taiwan. If you are investing in Taiwan because you believe that the American Defense Department is going to be there to back you up, you're making a bad decision. If you need,
because we don't want a war with China.
It immediately
exactly right.
You think, okay, this conversation, it doesn't affect my life because this is, who the hell cares? China, new China, old China, Taiwan, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. But it does start to matter when you start to realize that it's jobs that are 100 miles to our east, right?
Absolutely.
It's incredibly tied into our local economy as well.
It does absolutely get tied in. We should not be in the business of bribing companies to make investments here in the United States. We should be continuing to make the United States the best place to invest in the world, which in many cases it absolutely is. And we need to lower regulatory thresholds and barriers, financial barriers, taxation barriers, zoning barriers. Labor law barriers can be the most obnoxious of all. We need to streamline the investment process and make it as palatable as possible so the United States can remain the best place in the world in which to invest, but we shouldn't be bribing people to do that. If you need to invest in a place where you feel comfortable because the Defense Department of the U.S. federal government is going to back you up, then, yeah, can I interest you in Muncie, not Taiwan, right? The other thing that we need to do is to be more clear about what our interests are and what our interests are not in Europe. We need to send the signal immediately that an 18-month clock, 24-month clock has begun on our exit from NATO. We need to tell people, Madam or Mr. European leader, over the last year. Nonetheless, if you believe it is in your interest to remain fearful of the Russian army, then this is your heads up. The United States is not any longer going to be your plan A. It is not in the interest of the American people and I cannot tell the American people that it is in their interest for us to take money from them forcibly and to invest it in the defense of European nations against Russia. If you believe that you need to shore up your defenses, then it's time for you to start spending 2.5%, 3.5% of GDP. But the United States can no longer be your plan A. It's not in our interest to do so.
So the Maat administration, do you still want bases in Japan and Germany
No.
and across the world?
No.
You want a domestic military?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's time to bring those troops home. It's time to save trillions of dollars. To the extent to which these nations believe that they need greater military defensive power, then they are welcome to develop it. We should not be in the business, for example, of telling Japan that they should not be able to defend themselves. We have been loosening up on that in the past decade, but we should not be in the business of dictating to them at all.
Let's talk about stuff closer to home. I don't know if you get to drive on interstates over here, but we've got a historic
I
highway.
came in on 70.
We are very proud of it. It's the worst pavement. I've driven between New Orleans and Montreal in the last 18 months, and the strip of I-70 right here in Henry County
Yeah,
is
it's
among
impressive.
the worst asphalt
It's impressive.
pavement
Most
conditions
of the
on
driving
North
I do
America.
is sideways.
Yeah,
My family's in Chicago, and I'm in Washington.
a lot of the
I
east
have
to
to go
west.
through Washington to get home. I live in eastern Virginia, so yeah, you and I probably cross each other.
Yeah, oh yeah. I'm sure.
Somewhere, around Indianapolis, we
we
probably
wave
bump
in the
into each
Circle
other.
City. Federal government spent all kinds of money trying to improve road conditions.
Yeah.
Does the federal government have a role there? The user fees, the gas taxes, what we're doing, does that make sense, or is there a better way we should be handling infrastructure in the United
I
States?
think that the answer is yes and yes. There is not a theoretical reason why the federal government could not do this more efficiently. It's really just a practical, we've observed the federal government not to do this very well. And for that reason, I think that there are better ways of going at this, including at the state level, but also including user fees. The technology now exists, and we know that it exists, to get rid of the tax on gasoline, which perverts the market in a number of ways, and go directly to a user fee off of vehicles. The other thing that you can do is lease into the private sector the right to collect those user fees in exchange for maintaining roads. This has been done internationally with some success. And we cut out the
Bridge.
government completely.
Indiana leased the Indiana Toll Road, I-90,
Yeah.
in northern Indiana. They owned it. They turned over the maintenance and the tolling for 75 years, I think 10 years ago. They got a few $1 billion, and were able to invest some money into the roads here.
Yep.
And then that lease holder is responsible for
Yeah,
all of the future
exactly.
maintenance for about
That
65
can
more
work.
years.
I think the jury is out as to how well it will work.
Yeah. Well, it's
but
a
that
test
can't-
case that's happening now right here in Indiana.
Yeah, I know. I just think that we will see how well it works. I mean, I remain optimistic, but let's talk in a few years.
All right. Tell me about the United States and the way borders should operate. So for our audience that's listening that may not understand how libertarians generally look at it, I know this week in the news we've got there are House Republicans that are trying to impeach and throw out the Homeland Security Secretary
Yes.
For porous borders. How would a Maat administration handle border control?
As libertarians, we believe that we need a much more pro-immigration policy and a much more pro-immigrant policy. In other words, I believe that the way that we treat human beings coming across the border is really repugnant. I spent a couple of days down at the border last fall, and I saw through the eyes of law enforcement I met with, Customs Border Patrol experts that I met with, leading libertarians down there. I met with ranchers who have property on the border. We visited, an attorney of mine and I, we visited the border in several locations. And one of the things that we came away with was a deeper appreciation for the humanitarian crisis that we have going on down there because of human trafficking. And this is what we see. We spoke about the war on drugs briefly a while ago. Whenever the government tries to make something illegal that it cannot stop, that the culture is not ready to give up, or that the technology is not there to stop it, or the law enforcement resources are not there to stop it, that's where black markets come from. And black markets are inherently dangerous.
They create violence. Prohibition creates violence, right?
They create violence. The human trafficking across the United States-Mexican border is an order of magnitude larger than I think most Americans have an appreciation of. It's disgusting. It's un-American. It's not just a bad look. It is truly a crisis that rivals the rest of our messed up policy in total. And I don't think that we have a sufficient appreciation for that. What I would do is, first of all, notwithstanding the fact that I hate the dedication of federal resources to almost anything, I would dedicate greater federal maybe some of those resources we're saving from shrinking the military, right? Soon to be retired officers surged to the intake facilities so that we can step up the pace at which we bring immigrants in legally. We need to cut down on the incentive to come in illegally. So we need the resources to control the border in order to encourage people to come in legally instead of illegally. But that means we need to cut out this silly idea that it should take months to vet someone through. When I worked for the White House, I realize this is apples and oranges, but you'll get where I'm going. When I worked for the White House, we could vet someone into the White House in 90 minutes. From a cold start, you could just show up. 90 minutes later, we can get you in. That's got to be the goal. The goal has got to be you're presumed eligible unless we can demonstrate otherwise.
Right, yeah. So your position is not an open borders position. You're still advocating for a legal immigration system. We need to be screening people.
Highly efficient.
Highly efficient. And much greater flow.
Gotcha.
Immigration is good for the United States.
Yes.
I also recognize the American population is not ready to be told that we're not going to vet people through.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, Florida has been dealing with this at a massive scale last summer. How home construction crippled. There were neighborhoods that had nobody working,
right?
Because they essentially labor went out on strike. It disappeared, because of some governmental policies that were happening.
There was all kinds of construction shortages because of it. If you guys remember when avocados were like $6 a piece, I mean,
it affects certain of us more than others. The avocado market.
Yeah. Young millennials like Dakota, the avocado toast crisis of 2023, unbelievable trauma.
But jobs that Americans don't want to do. Right. And we need people to do those jobs. Yeah. And it contributes greatly to our economy, and not just our economy, but our culture as well. And that's how America has always been.
Devil's advocate. Devil's advocate says, hey, we're not building enough houses. We don't have somewhere for these folks to go. People come in. Where are they supposed to go? You've got people that are getting put on buses and sent to communities that really can't accept them in what you would call political stunts. I got to think there's some government policy that says, hey, you've jacked interest rates up so high that people don't want to sell their houses. Material costs have gone up. We can't get houses built. There's a functional system that's broken dealing with housing in the country right now as well.
I think the comedian Joey Diaz made a joke about this. He said he's a Cuban from Miami, and he said, it's time that we close the border, we build the wall, and we say, sorry, folks, America's just full. There's not enough room. But he was
I
living
get
in
the
Los
joke,
Angeles at the time.
But the truth is that America is not full. We are not crowded by international standards. We're not crowded in an economic sense. We don't have a scarcity of resources that would suggest that it's...
We might be putting too many people in the Southwest where there's no water with bad policy.
Absolutely, and that's because of bad public policy toward water.
Right.
If we had allocated water in a market sense, Chicago would still be the second largest city in the United States. So that we just completely screwed up. But I think that the people have gone there because of bad water policy. We need greater immigration. To your point, Dakota, one of the things I think the American public has not been told sufficiently is that not only is immigration good for us culturally, it's also good for us economically, and not just in terms of the labor market, but immigrants typically commit fewer crimes on average than people born in the United States. They use fewer resources of the local government and of the federal government for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that they're legally ineligible to take advantage of social welfare programs, and they don't typically bring children of school age in with them at the same rate as people who are born in the United States. So for all these reasons, if you care about the crime rate, if you care about culture, I have not read it, but go ahead. The basic idea is that America could have 1 billion people at some point in the future.
The book's argument is America should have 1 billion people. And he made the argument in the book that if America had 1 billion people in it, and this is... You made me think of it because you said our population density is like nothing compared to international standards, because he said if we had 1 billion people, which is roughly 3 times our population is now,
Right.
then we would still have less than half the population density of Germany, which is insane. It's an absolutely insane thing to think about. But the it's just hard to not recognize the economic and social value that there would be to having a booming population in America. And given how Americans that are born here and raised here are reproducing, which the rate is going down.
Yep.
The only way that we get there is
you
through
youngsters need
better
to
immigration.
get to work in the same way that my generation, was conducting the heavy lifting.
We're going as quick as we can. So,
agreed. We do need an expanding population, not only to handle the pyramid schemes that our federal government has put together for, Social Security and other things. By the way, we need to phase out Social Security. It's an evil program, and it needs to go.
Families have a hard time starting when they have $40,000 or $50,000 in student loan debt, and they look at trying to buy a $300,000 house. Family units start
Agreed.
later, so you're losing people in your population just because of policy that has built an incredible. It's almost a barrier to entry into parenthood. Either you accidentally have kids at 18 or 19, or the people that are trying to be careful find
Agreed.
themselves to be
It's
35, 40 years old before they start.
Yeah, agreed. It's a long-term phenomenon. I believe that this is going to get sorted out over the next couple of decades for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is a growing recognition that we probably don't need quite as many kids going off to college as we are sending today. Mm-hmm. Whether that means fewer going to college at all or doing so in a less expensive fashion, one way or another, I think that the structure of higher education is going to look a little bit different in a couple decades.
So now, the other side of that coin is, to play devil's advocate, is you could just make it free.
Well,
you can't make it free. You could make it. You could lower the price to $0.
Yeah. For the individual that's
someone's still going to have to. I mean,
just as Jeremiah said earlier, there's no such thing as free
lunch.
But
there's no such thing as free lunch at college.
So, but that would be the idea of Bernie obviously made it
But then you'd have
popular
overconsumption of it.
is right.
Right.
Is saying, well, if it's
You have-
causing the
It
detriment.
could arguably be better public policy, and I'm not advocating for this, but arguably it would be better public policy to double the price
to increase the barrier of entry.
to discourage people
To
from
make-
going to
once-
college
to
for
make
bad
Once
reasons.
the
college
sticker
what
price
it-
is so high that only doctors and people that are going to actually truly have to use it and consume it. Nobody's going to go to college for an art degree when it costs them $380,000 to do a 4-year deal. What's looking at goldnewdeal.org? You said you want to impose term limits. Do you have something wrong with Mitch McConnell serving since 1984?
No, I think that everyone ought to have the right to vote for whatever 111-year-old nincompoop you want to vote for. That's a good long-term, tried and true libertarian
I
principle.
personally like people that can tell me what sliced bread was like when it was brand new.
and voting for Mitch does feel like the greatest idea since sliced bread. But I would characterize term limits as albeit a bad idea, I would say term limits are a bad idea whose time has come. We have learned that the power of incumbency is so large as to nearly be insurmountable in most cases. And so in that sense, it's a structural problem. It's not really true that it's a fair fight when you have an incumbent and a challenger, because the incumbents have learned how to manipulate the system.
Try having an incumbent in a state like Indiana where you still have straight ticket voting as well. One of 7 remaining states that has straight ticket voting.
Still.
Brutal.
Yeah,
Brutal.
And there's also the external factors that come into play here, like gerrymandering.
Sure.
And just, I mean, honestly, it's really just geographical location as well, based on where you are. I mean, people tend to vote the way that their parents voted, and it kind of continues on in line. Your parents are instilling their values in you from day one.
Right.
So it just makes sense.
My kids do everything I tell them to do.
Right. Yeah. My son does, and he's 3.
There's
He
a moth in
obviously
here.
doesn't.
Spectacular.
Yeah, well, you've had a good 3 years. It falls apart pretty quickly. I was being sarcastic.
Oh, I was being sarcastic. That he has an iron will. He's
And good
something
for him.
else. Yeah.
Well, we do try to instill our values in our kids, obviously, and it's one of the reasons why geography does matter. But a lot of those barriers are coming down.
Gotten to yet that we want to make sure that we pick up or that we address?
I don't know that there's a particular major policy that we've missed. We do need to cap spending. We do need to end the Fed. We do need a much more anti-war message, and I believe that Americans are open to it than ever before. The other thing, we talked about primary and secondary education, which although is a local issue, I think it's one of the most important, arguably as important as any issue in the United States public policy, and we talked about immigration. So I think we hit, basically the big ones. We can talk about, we can go on all night about other issues, but I do think it's important for everyone to understand that the structure of our political process these days, the fact that Republicans' number one objective is to keep Democrats out of power and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
This is where authoritarianism comes from in a democracy. And maybe 20 years ago, we used to make fun of the idea that in certain democracies around the world, they would head in an authoritarian direction. We used to think that it would never happen in the United States. And of course, now we've proven that it can happen here, and it has been happening here. We saw it in terms of COVID, especially, but we've seen it in the way the federal government behaves in all kinds of ways, of course. I believe that the American public is increasingly waking up to the idea that a lot of our problems are the result of bad public policy, and that we need not just change, not just a tremendous amount of change, but at a fundamental institutional level. And I think that people are going to be open to the idea of pursuing a different kind of relationship with their government than ever before.
we sit around this table and we talk with candidates from all different, all kinds of different walks of life, and you generally get the consensus from people that they want the same thing. You want trash picked up on time. You want clean water, clean sewers. You want the electricity to be there, police to show up, fire to show up when you call 911. All of the basic services that make society work. It's just a conversation of how do you get there? How much should government be involved? How should it actually function?
Yeah.
And sometimes the more faith people put in government that it's actually going to work out, the more you realize that government isn't good. They just screw it up, man.
The more disappointment is forthcoming.
It's like being a Chicago Cubs fan. You just ready to get hurt again almost every single year.
Yeah.
Except for 2016.
No, agree. I've been a Cubs fan since the 1960s, and so it's very difficult for me to be in the same room even with a Mets fan, but I think I can be in the same room with a Republican or a Democrat more easily.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I was just going to say that we can make progress because I think that people are more open to it. I also think it's important for us to recognize that most people have a libertarian streak. They wouldn't characterize it as such, right? But most people are sick of the what we call the political duopoly, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. I think people are ready for our message. I think it's up to us to differentiate ourselves from Republicans and Democrats, to plant the libertarian flag in the ground hard, and to raise that flag high so people can find us. That will be the secret to success.
So what's victory look like? Is it trying to get on the debate stage? Like, that was the big thing with the Johnson campaign and the Jorgensen campaign the last couple of years. How do you measure success? Obviously, as a libertarian, we have a hard time getting folks elected to city councils. So, yeah, it'd be great in 2024 to elect our first libertarian president. But tell me how the campaign can affect
Having run for Congress myself as a libertarian, I can tell you that the value of the Libertarian Party brand is approximately zero. And I blame, in part, our past national campaigns, our presidential campaigns. We need to lead. The reason that the Golden New Deal has its own brand and its own URL, that's our commitment that we can't back up on it. We need to lead with a platform that's very policy forward, very uncompromising in terms of libertarian principles, the most transformational ideas. We need to lead with that because that's what's going to contribute to the branding of the party. It is also true, however, that we need to lead with that because that's what's going to differentiate us from the other parties and really create a third choice. That's important on a strategic level, on a tactical level even, in terms of attracting voters, donors, media attention. All of that goes out the window. If you define yourself in the context of the other parties, it doesn't work. Those are the mistakes that we've made in the past. So success looks like building the party brand and leading with a very transformational message. But it results in greater attention. And so the two should feed off of each other. It's not true, as some people would tell you, it is not true that you need to choose between the two, either a strategy for pursuing more people or a strategy for leading with a real differentiated message. It's not either or. It has to be both.
Do you think the party has to have 50 state ballot access to be able to achieve that?
No, it has to have almost 50 state access, and so it's very, very important that we achieve as close to that as possible, because the states in which we're not on the ballot, it's natural for people not to pay attention. People will not pay attention unless they think that there's something competitive that is in their interest to pay attention to. It's one of the reasons why it's not enough to run with the most transformational ideas. You have to have the credibility of a background in public policy and a very professional campaign, because people believe it's a competition among individuals as well.
At the beginning of the show, Dakota, we had a teaser question.
That's right.
You ready to get your answer?
Yep. So what previous Libertarian POTUS candidate would you compare yourself to the most?
None. That is the honest truth, and that's notwithstanding the fact, this is the half of an answer that's meant to make you feel better, notwithstanding the fact that I am a big Harry Brown fan.
I was going to say, if it wasn't our Lord and Savior Ron Paul, I was hoping I was going to hear a Harry Brown in there.
That's what I was thinking.
I love me some Harry Brown, but I must say that we're trying something different, and I say that not just as a matter of saying we're better than the others, but I would hate for there to be a Harry Brown fan out there watching this and saying, whoa, you don't remind me of Harry Brown at all. So I'm not trying to say that I should. What I'm trying to say is we're trying something different. We're leading with the most transformational ideas, but we're backing up with someone with gray hair, 20 years in Washington, and a second career in public service and public policy, with a professional team that, by the way, already has 14 people in the paid staff. So we're trying something very different, very professional, very credible, and at the same time, the most differentiated message of all time for the Libertarian Party.
That's spectacular. Producer Zach, do you have any questions or final thoughts that you want to get off your chest before we put this to bed for the night?
Nope.
You've had a great time.
Yeah.
All right.
Sitting back,
We're up past our bedtime. We're not
Yeah.
after 10 o'clock. This is overtime for the Boss Hog crew.
Yeah.
Dakota's going to be taking 3 Monster Energies just to be able to get back to Spiceland, Indiana tonight.
Yeah. It's not. I'm usually an hour asleep.
Not me. I'm up editing till midnight. That's my role in
That's
this.
good Hoosier living.
That's it.
Yeah.
But Dakota's
right.
up before the chickens in the morning. Mike, it's been our
It's
pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure to be with you. I love being with you. For Indianapolis and south of Indianapolis, so it's a real joy to be able to share in your state once again.
There you go. Well, I married an IU Bloomington girl myself, so that's it happens.
You can't go wrong.
She's pretty proud of it. I'm more of a Purdue guy myself, but it's a house divided and whatnot. With that, we say thank you very much, Mike, and to the rest of the audience that joined us. We will be back next Thursday night.